You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello, and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. Very excited to have two old friends in the business. It's the Analyst Corner today. We've got our good buddy Krishnan of Sixth Sense Advisors and John Santaferraro dialing in from Tuscany. Come on, this guy is just a baller extraordinaire. He's been around for years, too. We've been following this space for a long time. And the show today, Change, Transform, the new world of data management. And I will admit, I got the idea for the name from the movie Excalibur. If you remember when Merlin was changing Uther Pendragon across the waterway as he was going to do his business, he said, change, transform. One of the best movies ever. Don't miss that movie. It's so good. Even to this day, it's fantastic. And that's really what we're seeing in the world of data management. You know, we've been in this business for a long time. And I remember the first year of DM Radio back in 2008, thinking to myself, all this ETL, all these batch windows, data is just going around and around and around and around. I'm thinking to myself, how many times are organizations ETLing the same data into the same gosh darn place? Well, some folks were doing very clever things like change data capture. Some folks back then were doing data virtualization. That was a thing back then. Denodo and Composite were a couple companies doing all that. But by and large, people were just ETLing data into various places, usually into a data warehouse for the analytics industry. But I thought to myself, this is just, there's so much movement of data that is unnecessary. But back then it was hard to really ascertain who was using what data for which purpose and what value was being derived from that. Not as hard to do that these days. So we'll find out from our guests what they think. But I look at this and I see this new whole opportunity, especially a lot of this AI-driven stuff, to be much more efficient with our data, with how we use it, when we use it, what analysts get access to it, how and why. All that fun stuff, I think, is really going to transform significantly in the next few years. And there's also this concept of data orchestration and unified data orchestration, as John Santaferraro calls it. So we'll talk about that today as well. So let's bring in John. You wrote a paper about this. John, tell us a bit about yourself and life in Italy and how data management can be done much more efficiently.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I would have to be another show probably to talk about life in Italy, but I can talk about unified data orchestration and the changes that are happening in the data space. When it comes to the ETL that you just described, unfortunately, ETL has not gone away, probably never will. The world of data integration as we knew it 25, almost 30 years ago, I was in a booth next to Gaurav Dhillon when he was the booth babe and starting Informatica.
Wow.
So it and this was all the way, I think this was all the way back in, my goodness, 1995, 1996, somewhere around there. ETL is still here. Back then, it was 70% of every analytics in every kind of reporting project back then. Today, it's probably 69%. I mean, it just hasn't changed. So what I actually have gone out on a limb and said in my white paper, and I'll say it here live, that mark down 2023 on your calendars. This is the year that data integration dies. It can't keep going. Since it started, we've had all of these new movements that have come and gone, right? We went from data warehousing to data lakes to data pipelines to you name it. There's been all kinds of new to the cloud, right? Ultimately to the cloud. And right. Each time one of those things happened, new data integration tools were created. One to work for a data lake, something else to work for the cloud, something just for data pipelines, a different set of tools for streaming data, right? And so I did some research about 2 years ago when I was at EMA, and in the research, it showed that 72% of the participants in the research had between 6 and 8 different data integration type tools. These were larger enterprises. And so they were moving data in and out from one data integration tool to another. And it was ridiculous the amount of time that they were wasting. Every time they brought in a new tool, it added cost, it added complexity. They had to skill up to be able to use it. And so what I'm seeing is that people out there are fed up with having to manage multiple platforms for data integration, for data transformation, for data movement. And so there's a move to push back and say, no, we want to move back to a single platform that can handle all different kinds of data at all different latencies, be able to do all of the different data engineering functions, from integration to transformation to cleansing to prep to ML ops to you name it, change data capture, data movement, and be able to move data when it needs to be moved. So I'm excited about this concept of unified data orchestration. I'm happy to tell more about it, but I think that's probably a good intro.
Well, I tell you what, you think about the applications. When people are doing business, they're in an application somewhere. I mean, some people who are in engineering are actually in the database making some changes, but typically that is an enabling process to get the person with the application to do something interesting. Now that we have the cloud as this sort of de facto center of gravity for both functionality and data, we have a very interesting situation, especially with cloud native being accepted as a norm, as a standard for how to do things. Now, there will always be a wide variety of different mechanisms and different ways of doing business, of enabling functionality, et cetera. But in the main, you're going to see most of the activity in the cloud and then out to the edge, to the endpoints, to our devices, et cetera. Well, if you're in an application, that's when you're doing business. With observability now, and I'll bring in Krishnan to talk about this, you could do some very elegant observability to be watching what data is being accessed in applications, what data is not being accessed in applications, and use that to kind of reverse engineer all the heavy lifting that we've been doing under the covers in the data warehousing space, in the data management space, in the records management space. I would argue that probably 80% of data movement is unnecessary, and that's kind of what John is alluding to. And Krish, I'll throw it over to you. If you really leverage the power of observability, and especially the power of AI and pattern matching, all this great stuff, I think you'll be able to get much leaner and much more efficient and much more cost effective at doing your data movement for applications than we've ever seen before. But Krish, what do you think?
Eric, you put the context very well, which is with the newness of being able to get to a different platform, which is the cloud, right? So when we have the new platform, and this is where I would like to refer back to what John was saying, we don't want people to rush into another silo building exercise and say, oh, I'm on the cloud, I'm building a data lakehouse 5.0, whatever, and no, right? To your point, Eric, this is exactly where we got to take a step back and say, wait, time out, right? We don't want any of the old world cowboy tricks at this point, because the unified orchestration paper, John, I've read the paper, and by the way, I'm very well in tune with where you want to take us to with that whole concept. But for people to understand this in our discussion, we need people to take a step back and say, in the cloud world, we're going to set up data monitoring for data traffic that comes in or goes out, because you don't need to land all the data in and then qualify it and then process it and then explore it. You might just say, hey, I need to set up 5 different AI patterns. And then the minute I hit pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, my process dials out, goes to where the data lives, and then runs what needs to run and pulls out what is needed. Now you're leveraging AI to tell you exactly how efficient you are in your process, and you will do it, whether people will accept it today or not at this minute. In the next year, if the three of us have the same discussion and talk about it, we're going to see use cases. People are going to say, oh yeah, my observability took care of this, or oh yeah, my monitoring took care of that, and I don't need to bring this data in. And eventually, John, we should raise our glasses and have a huge cheers, because when this siloed world of transforming data goes away and we get into a unified world, which is agile and, self-scalable, self-scale out, self-scale down, up across all pieces considered, then we are going to actually say, we're doing ETL, but it's not ETL the way it was defined when the tools were built in the legacy world. We still extract data that has value, we bring it across, load it, and then we do run optimal transformations as needed on it. But the concept will catch fire, whether people want it or not. Eric, the LLM world is going to be a huge proponent of that change to come through, for sure.
Mm-hmm. There are just many more efficient ways of getting things done now. And if you think of data movement in, for example, the supply chain context, right? Because data is a resource that is being provided. It's being moved from place A to place B to be able to facilitate this application to run, to take your money, to deliver you some product, et cetera. Well, I promise you, the people in the supply chain world have figured out, thanks to COVID and tariffs and other things, very clever ways of getting their job done, because it's very expensive to move products from France across the pond to the United States. I mean, these things are very expensive. So I think that we're going to see, and maybe I'll throw this to you, Krish, and then back to John for commentary. I think a lot of data professionals, data engineers, really should pay close attention to what the supply chain world deals with and how they solve their problems, because data is expensive to move as well. Not as expensive as parts like bottles of wine, for example, but expensive nonetheless. And I think that this explosion that we've seen in like the data warehouse and the data lakehouse space, all that stuff, there are going to be even more lessons learned about how expensive that is and how cumbersome it is to save every little piece of data and pretend that we're going to be able to do that efficiently. But Krish, what do you think?
No, Eric, the example that you're bringing, supply chain, is a fantastic one, because data, by its realm of what it is, a lot of people like to say it's an asset, blah, blah, blah. No. Time out, right? It's a liability for anybody, right? You got to protect it. You got to put eyes over it. You got to put it under a blanket. You got to have these mechanisms by which the access is restricted. When you're looking at the pieces you're doing before this data is even accessed and addressed, there is a ton of expense that you're landing at. So in the supply chain world, where we're seeing things differ now, what we are seeing is companies that do business as the supply chain giants, whether you take CDW, you take Granger, you take DigiKey, take any of these guys, they all have consolidated operations where all of what they have by geography, by city, by product, by manufacturer is cataloged, and their catalog is updated 24/7 by 365. Now, what that means is, for example, Airbus says, I need 3 of these particular screws that I need to replace on a legacy aircraft, for example. Now, the legacy aircraft is situated in flight and has landed in, let's assume, Latin America somewhere. What Granger or DigiKey or CDW, any of these guys, what they do is, whoever Airbus picks runs the order, processes it, runs all the pieces from a paper perspective, not the data itself, not the part itself, but the part is sourced as close to that local exchange where that upgrade needs to be done. It's done at that minute, right? So that's exactly what John's talking about, saying take the process to where data sits. That's exactly what I want to see happen. Where whichever data center across the world, take the process, go there, run the exercise, then whatever values need to come back, bring it across, not an issue. Now you're lightweight, you're easy to run, and you will see the orchestration work. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I love the analogy because we have these modern platforms that can store data, simple storage as an example, and you can run all kinds of applications, analytical applications, data transformation processing on top of it. The same is true with the more modern cloud first data warehouses, where you can bring the data in once, do all of your transformation on the platform, and only move it out when you need it for something else, when that's a certainty. So I think the analogy works. And one of the basic principles of the unified data orchestration platform is this idea that you take the processing to where the data lives. You don't take the data to where the processing is. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the supply chain is that in the supply chain, once they were able to capture data from across the entire supply chain, have it in a single place, then they could understand what was happening, and then they were able to optimize. Then they figured out, where is the best place to store things? When should we move it? What's the best time to move it? When should we even receive the data in the first place? Not everything needs to be there immediately. So they figured all of that out because they had captured all of the data. And that's the beauty of a unified data orchestration platform. You have observability into everything. Mm-hmm. So you know where all your data is, you know how it's being used, you know what can be done, and you can even optimize the processing that needs to be done on the data to do it on the platform that best processes that kind of data or that kind of analytics. So GPUs for AI, you can have the data warehouse for analytical kinds of workloads, and you can have the simple storage, right, for all of this unstructured data. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and basically, once you learn to appreciate the value of data movement and the cost of data movement and data processing and data management, and you view it in this lens of supply chain, you don't want bottles of wine that no one's going to buy sitting in your warehouse all day. And that's kind of what we have in these data lakes. We have lots of data that's just sitting there and not being used. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking with two of my best friends in the business, Krishnan of Sixth Sense Advisors and John Santaferraro, another analyst who's been all around the world of data for many years now. And in the break there, we were just talking about metadata. Way back in the early days when Jim Erickson was our co-host, he used to have a bell he would ring anytime someone said metadata. Ding! He would ring the bell. And, 15 and a half years later, guess what? We're still talking about metadata. And when you combine the value of metadata with observability and AI, suddenly things get very interesting. And what I'm really excited about is when we can turn these foundational models onto the problem of cloud infrastructure and just data management processing in general to identify where we need to do things, where we need to do transformations in the most efficient way possible. And I think we're going to have some really interesting results from intelligent integration, intelligent automation, as some folks like the guys at Boomi talk about. Last week, we talked to them. I think there's going to be a tremendous gain in efficiency as we turn this around and start optimizing the flow of information and where the compute happens. John Santaferraro, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that metadata is the magic behind artificial intelligence when it comes to the world of data management and data engineering. When I think back to some of the origins of the capture of metadata, originally it was definitions, it was a little bit of lineage, but it just sat in a storage somewhere, and people would be excited because they captured it. They spent hours capturing it manually and storing it someplace. And it became a bad word because there was hype, and it just sat there and nobody figured out what to do with it. And so then you have this series of data integration tools that came out for unstructured data, for Hadoop, and they said we don't need metadata. The whole API integration world started integrating, application to application, data to data APIs. They said metadata, we don't need it. Even I think initially in the cloud, as people were migrating to the cloud, the point was just get your data in there. Metadata, we don't need it. And what I'm seeing now is this swing back to the active use of metadata, because people are realizing if you understand where all your data is and what it means and how it's changed over time and how it's being used, who's using it, and you can actively feed that into an AI engine and feed it into the LLM, it actually then feeds recommendations, it feeds automations, it feeds eventually the optimization of data flowing and being transformed throughout the entire business ecosystem. It's powerful.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Krish. I think you'll agree with that. I mean, the metadata tells you what's happening where. It's a key component of observability to know, again, who's using what, at what frequency, for what business value. Once senior executives can see that kind of thing, that's when you can, think about like a baseball analogy. And if you go to a baseball game these days, it's amazing if you pay attention to where people move around on the field. Well, that's all because of the analysis they're doing on who hits dead pull, who hits to right field, left field, all that kind of stuff. Once you know where certain things are going to move, that's when you can start optimizing your own game plan and your own business plan. And that's kind of where we're going with this metadata stuff, right, Krish?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. In fact, to make it even more real, right? There's like a stealth project that I'm working on. Eric, you're aware of that. And I can tell you real-time Chroma DB use case where Llama 7B versus Llama 13B, the chat models. 7B takes maybe 5 microseconds for a prompt to be answered back. And Llama 13B, which I thought would take more time, stumped me 1.3 microseconds. That's like my hand is not even off the return key and the answer is flowing on my screen. So metadata has made a huge impact, right? To John's point, and taking it from where, hey, if your process is that smart, can it deliver value when it is running outside of the data world because it's going to run where the data sits? If you take that whole analogy and think of it, the way this entire system that I'm talking about is working, it is sitting on a cloud somewhere. The models are sitting in Hugging Face, wherever they've hosted it. My database is sitting somewhere else, which Hugging Face is pointing it to. And my prompt is running from my little bitty laptop. Now, process executing where data sits, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. I'm not having these downloads and they're sitting in a particular file system in no. So when we talk about the nuance of how the spread is happening, it is changing the game like that, click, snap. And this is on unstructured data, Eric. Now take it to structured data and let's see what John says.
Yeah, John, chime in.
When with structured data, everything becomes automated. And I think structured data will be the first set of data where everything that happens with data is going to be handled like an operating system.
Yeah.
When I sign on to my computer, I know that I have an operating system on here. I barely know what it is. I don't really care what it is. I care what I can do with it. I want to make sure it works and that it keeps me safe and that it keeps running my programs. And because structured data is so predictable, the the metadata that we capture on that will eventually feed into these artificial intelligence models and allow us to completely abstract away all of the complexities beneath the covers, so that all of what we do today in data engineering and data transformation and ETL, all of that just happens in the data operating system. Now, it's a little harder to do that with some of the unstructured data. Semi-structured, it works if you have JSON files and they're from a specific area. There's enough structure and the nesting is somewhat predictable in that you'll do the same. That'll be the second bowling pin probably to fall into this world of the data operating system. But with the structured data, absolutely, all of the complexities, maybe not in the next 3 years, but in the next 5 years, that'll all be abstracted away.
Yeah, and in fact, John, to take it even one step closer to where it strikes in people's minds, think of it this way. Today, automation is something that the newest sets of engineers, whom the last 5 years have graduated from schools and come, the 20-somethings, they're thinking about automating. Their whole nuance of coding is way different than what you would see some of the senior folks do. So when you bring that automation to be the nature of the beast, right, that's exactly where this entire process is going to go. Then how many engineers would you need to go and write a code to do point A or point B or point C? That's the exact question to ask.
Yeah.
And that takes us, John, in fact, into another area that you like to talk about, John, which is the whole data model itself, right? I mean, are we still going to stick with just one, dimensional modeling or whatever, third normal form, call it whichever way it is, or are we going to take a bold step? And Eric's going to love this. Are we going to take a bold step and are we going to start discussing topic modeling?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that what we're seeing, like, take a look at these large language models and what they're able to do and why they've blown people away. Well, first of all, it's just a reflection of what's on the web. That's what they did. They went and they analyzed copious amounts of text, and they were able to ascertain basics about word flow, syntax. What's kind of fun is it kind of writes like I like to write it. Like, use a lot of action verbs. You could tell they're kind of weighted in that direction as opposed to passive verbs, for example.
Yep.
But we're seeing this reflection come back to us, right? And now we're coming up with faucets and nozzles and ways to sort of eke it out into usable form, like letters that it's writing for us, things of that nature. But at the same time, like I've been suggesting, we're also going to get a view into the world of machines talking to each other and how machines talk to each other. And you look at what Kubernetes has done with distributing compute, right? And of course, that's getting more and more robust as time goes by, and it's kind of changing that whole game as well. I think we're going to start seeing a reflection of the same kinds of things about patterns for how data is stored, how data is shared, how data is used. And efficiency plans are going to be recommended to data managers, to data professionals, to say, hey, you know what? You should only persist this in your warehouse, and you should only deliver this in this area here, because those are the only people using it. And so you won't have to have 10,000 taxis going around New York City day and night, because Uber has all this data and can look and see, well, where do we get peaks and valleys over a period of time? And they're optimizing just like Amazon optimizes their infrastructure. I think we're going to see this really interesting era of systems design and architecture. But maybe I'll throw it over to John to comment. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm already seeing it, because I have done some work recently with the original developers of Einstein at Salesforce. And when Einstein was developed at Salesforce, it was developed as an AI engine that kind of sat in the middle of the platform. And they built out the engine, and I think they had the beginnings of an LLM as a part of that, because they were already beginning to see their ecosystem as a topic area, like you said, Krish. And because they had the entire schema, they were able to do everything that needed to be done in terms of automation and recommendations in the entire Salesforce platform. Well, these guys left Salesforce and built a company for the cobbler's children who had no shoes, software engineering. So they have. I already said, by the way, that metadata is the magic behind the Gen AI capabilities. The other magic is a schema. And so they've developed an amazing unified schema for all of software development that brings together all of the different tools that software engineers used. They bring in finance data, they bring in HR data, and they are now building the model at the core of this around Gen AI and other AI models to be able to automate everything in that world. So the magic of automated software development is not just going to come out of nothing because there's Gen AI. It's going to come out of expertise around the topic. So metadata on all of the data use, metadata about all of the code, all captured and analyzed by the LLM and Gen AI based on the schema. So what you're saying, Krish, is it's already happening. It's not future.
Yeah, that's really cool. And think about like traffic patterns, right? So we're getting very good because, again, you have all this information now through Apple and Samsung and other organizations now. Like when you're driving, I just drove from New York back to Pittsburgh, and you'll get, there's a speed trap up ahead. Well, why is that happening? Because there are so many devices and people are seeing things, and that's observability. Right. And so from an urban development perspective, and you have to get intelligent about this stuff. You have to actually pay attention to the data. And, there's this whole human side of doing things, and bureaucracies tend to stand in the way of all that. But I think you're going to see some walls just crashing down as we get much better at managing our assets and knowing where things are, right? I mean, IT service management, for example, is going to be revolutionized by this kind of stuff because you can sense all the different patterns like, it was Bob. We know what his problem was. Reboot your machine, please. I mean, just little things like that take up so much time. You look at the support world, how much time people have to spend doing boring little tasks if you haven't optimized your environment to use some of these new technologies out there. But I think we're going to see this really, really fascinating world unfold in the next 3 to 5 years. And then what's going to happen is that the companies that are doing it correctly, well, they're going to have big profit margins. They're going to have excited people. They're going to have motivated developers working on this stuff. I always go back to the power of morale and the key to have morale in your organization, because if you're not jumping on the bandwagon with some of these new tools and technologies, even playing around with things like ChatGPT, you have to play with these tools to understand them, using the prompts to see what you get. You'll get garbage if you use a bad prompt, garbage in, garbage out, basically ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer.
Yep.
I don't think that's ever been more true than with ChatGPT or these large language models. You need to give it clear prompts. We talked about this last week on the show. Eve Mulkers, he gave a great presentation about this. You're going to have to get better and better, and I think it's going to require probably some more focus on what is interesting to you, because you're not going to be able to do everything. The generalists, I think, are going to have a hard time dealing with this new world, but it's going to be so much fun if you're in the topic that you want to be in. If you're talking about what you want to be talking about, you're going to be kicking butt and taking names. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Okay, folks, welcome back to DM Radio, talking all things transformation today. Change, transform, the new world of data management. Things are changing very rapidly. There are leading indicators. There are lagging indicators. Krish in the break was just talking about the hydrogen-powered car from back in like the 1960s and how it was just disappeared. But how now, if you look at Teslas, Elon Musk figured out a way to do communication between vehicles. And Krish, I just thought it was great that you brought that up. And I'm thinking to myself, how powerful is this going to be? Because again, all you need to know is what you need to know to make your next best decision, right? And we do all this heavy lifting to be able to enable people to do an analysis to figure something out. I think a lot of that heavy lifting is going to go away in the future. And this is an interesting shot across the bow, I guess, of these current business models, because they're all predicated on how much compute and how much storage and all these things. Even though Amazon, I find this very interesting, has it in their DNA to constantly lower the price, right? That's the first time you've really seen that in such a precise sort of DNA-oriented way for a corporation to do that. That's interesting stuff. But just expound for a minute on this whole analogy of the hydroelectric car from way back when, and what it means for today. Krish, go ahead.
Sure, Eric. In fact, I was at the Smithsonian about 3-4 years ago, and both my sons were like, "Dad, take a look at this. It's the hydrogen car that, JFK said no to GM because of whatever." And my younger son, the guy's a geek at heart by his own, terms. He was about 14. Yeah, he was like roughly 13, 14 years old. He discovers, gadgets within the car, which are like sending communications. And they said, we had technology that GM had powered in the late 1950s, early 60s, into a hydrogen-powered car to communicate to data centers as the car drove itself across different areas in Michigan. Today in Tesla, which I have a Model Y, and I don't know what information it sends, but Tesla knows every second where I'm driving, what I'm doing, where I'm stopping, how fast am I going, am I using, the auto drive features that they sell. It's like unbelievable amount of information. And in fact, I was just thinking, John said Tuscany, and I'm thinking electric bikes. Think of the electric bikes, and I assume the three of us are in Tuscany by some coincidence, and we meet up and we're on electric bikes and we're just zigzagging our way across. Our bikes can communicate to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to have like, oh, Eric, are you on the right track? Oh, John, I'm on the right track. Is Eric follow? None of that old world technique is needed anymore.
Right.
Right? Unified orchestration, same system, same network. You just say click, 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 and you're on.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Unified orchestration. You don't need to share things. I'm actually working on a paper right now for a very interesting company called DevRev. The founder of Nutanix founded this new company, Dheeraj Pandey, and they're showing me how giving visibility across lines of business within the organization can offer tremendous optimization of workload of what you're even doing, because people find out, hey, we don't need that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to sit in meetings all the time and go over these things. And so that's kind of where we're going with this unified data orchestration, AI fueled advancements in collaboration and knowing what to work on, who needs which part and where, and being able to get to that part very efficiently and deliver it. These are the kinds of things we're talking about. And you kind of need these examples to drive it home. But I'll throw it over to you, John. When you recognize that, you're at the store, and let's just use another example here. You have all this checkout stuff now where you're going to have cameras that are like focusing on where you're walking, what you're putting in your cart. So you don't even need to scan it. Like, it's already scanned by the time you get out the door. You're almost out the door and your phone goes ding. Your wife wanted a bottle of white wine, idiot. Don't forget to go buy that. You can actually have that kind of functionality where your phone is going to remind you to buy the bottle of white wine so your wife doesn't get mad at you when you get home. Right, John?
Yeah, I mean, I have lived that before, so without the automation.
You felt the pain.
But yeah, I think the possibilities are endless, and to me the holy grail of all of this as it works together is the ability to be able to innovate more quickly than the competition, right? And to use all of the unified data to be able to accelerate the innovation cycles and be able to figure out models like what you just described before the competition can do it. And if you have all of your data in a single place orchestrated together, and you have your AI and ChatGPT already in motion, then you're going to be able to do it. I recently spoke with the chief data officer of a product company, a consumer product company, and he was hired a year and a half ago as the chief data officer, chief analytics officer. He had to fix the data integration, data orchestration problem before he could start thinking about these AI models and the new services, the new data services, the new recommendation services, the new alert services that they could put into their printers and their cameras and all of the things that they make. And now he has created this area where there's accelerated innovation in a short period of time. In just a few months, he has 50 new projects, business-sponsored projects that are in the works. And he has another 70 that are scheduled to go into that same pipeline. That's insane. That's this kind of innovation has never been done before.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And you're getting to a key component again of morale and boosting morale. People in your organization who are engaged, they're trying to do good stuff. They're trying to get things done. They're trying to get new products out the door because it's fun. They're trying to get new services optimized because it's fun, because you enjoy that stuff. Like I'm a big believer that if you really enjoy what you do, you're going to do a better job than if you don't enjoy what you do. And what you're talking about here, what John's talking about, is enabling the team to try their ideas, because historically, what have you seen? Oh, no, we don't have time. We have to focus. We can't do that now. Like, why not? What do you mean? Like, one of my favorite quotes from a developer, my good buddy, says, busy is the enemy of creative. I like that one. Krish, what do you think? Busy is the enemy of creative.
100%. In fact, I would say 1,000% agreed, right? I mean, if I always say, yeah, I'm busy, I'll take a look at it later, right. I'm never going to get to it. So you got to put that, phrase to a stop and say, all right, you have a good process. Let me think about it. Let me get back to you. You got to start getting your mind into it, which is what we're after in the show too, right? I mean, the last 45, 50 minutes we have spoken, we've been hammering it back and forth saying, hey, new leadership, take advantage, take notice. The world is changing. Don't be, taking a lame duck role and then saying, oh, I didn't do it earlier. Never. I mean, what I would say 5 years ago, servant leadership worked great. Today, I would say go beyond servant leadership, become a facilitated servant leader, not just, I went to Harvard and I got this course. No, go and think about what works, why it works, because the competition is going to catch up to you for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the key, is you want to, and people, I think, most people are reasonable enough to know that if they see their idea in practice and it's not working, like, okay, well, let's try something else, right? But if your idea never gets into the practice realm, that's when you get frustrated. That's when you're like, I know this could have worked. I really believe this could have worked. Yep. So if you allow people, as they say, fail fast forward, they're going to be happy. Even if you find that it doesn't work, it's like, okay, but now I learned one more component to the architecture is the key. Usually the good ideas, they're good ideas. You just needed one or two more problem-solving moments to get over that last hurdle. And then that's when you're cruising and your car does what you want it to do. John Santaferraro, what do you think?
Yeah, I like to say that agility is going to replace agile, because the way that agile is done is ridiculous, right? and data-driven agility eliminates these stand-up meetings and scrums and all of that. It's like in the tech world, it's going to be completely transformed.
That's interesting. Agility will end agile, because, of course, agile isn't really very agile. I mean, it's more agile than waterfall, right? I mean, we've learned a few things along the way, but and so John's talking about agile programming, which has absolutely changed the game, but it's going to be even more agile because you get better and better guardrails and what you can work on. And you have these better architectures now for technology such that you don't break everything. It's like I came up with an analogy of the old Christmas lights. If anyone's old enough to remember the old Christmas lights, if one light went out, the whole string went out. Gone. And you didn't know which light was out. You had to replace every one, so you just threw it out. Well, then they figured out, hey, if you just run cord this way, you don't have to deal with that nightmare. Well, folks, podcast bonus segment is up next. You're listening to DM Radio.